In the U.S. Army tank schools, between 1943 and 1945, there was a rather risque joke going around, but it was all too true. The joke was, do you know how many Shermans it takes to take out a tiger? 4. But we're not talking about animals. We're talking about a tank, the Tiger, and those Shermans, the American tanks. Get ready to lose 3 of them. Now, that joke might have seemed exaggerated. It might have seemed grotesque, maybe even a bit macabre, because losing 3 tanks still meant losing quite a few men inside those tanks. But it was, as I said, all too true. Because if the collective imagination of World War II sees the constant advance of these armored vehicles, the German panzers, which have entered the collective imagination as unstoppable steel machines, well, that name, Tiger, has become synonymous with a tank that's almost indestructible. Today, we'll analyze its history. When we talk about the Tiger in the world of tanks and armored vehicles, we inevitably think of it, the Panzer VI, the Tiger I. It will be called that to distinguish it from its successor, but that's enough to inspire terror both among armored vehicle enthusiasts and among the last veterans of World War II, who remember it well, the Tiger fears. A heavy tank, almost indestructible, a powerful vehicle, a machine that the German army had actually requested well before the outbreak of World War II. The first studies for the later Panzer Tiger, the Tiger I, began between 1937 and 1938, when the Armaments Inspectorate of the O'Hare of the German Army began to request the development of a heavy tank, a tank that would be better armored and more heavily armed than medium tanks. At that time, between 1937 and 1938, the German armored force was still small. Most of the tanks are Panzer Y, which are barely effective even against infantry, and Panzer II, which are reconnaissance vehicles. The Panzer III already represent a significant leap forward. They are the first true modern medium tanks. But one component is missing. The heavier component is missing. From 1938 to 1940, the Armaments Inspectorate received several proposals from various weapons manufacturers. However, these proposals are not implemented, partly because there is no real need on the battlefield. The Panzer III, the Czech tanks requisitioned after the annexation of Czechoslovakia, and the Panzer IV proved to be excellent machines, effectively countering French tanks, and even the first Soviet tanks. But it is precisely in the Soviet Union that it becomes clear that the Panzer IV, and later even the Panther that replaces it, are inadequate against the heavy Soviet tanks, the KV-1S, which, although awkward in shape, are extremely powerful and put the German armored forces in serious trouble. From that moment, the Armaments Inspectorate once again requests more prototypes and other vehicles to be developed. Several companies take part in the bidding process because, after all, it's still a contract. The 2 finalist companies are Henschel, Sohn, and Porsche. Yes, that's right, you heard correctly, Porsche itself. Ferdinand Porsche, the founder of Porsche. At that time, he put aside, at least for the moment, his dream of building a sports car, a car that would only come to life after the war, and he is more involved in other projects. He built the prototype of the Kübelwagen, and he also built the prototype of the future Majorino and Maggioloni, the ones that would become the basis for Volkswagen, the people's car, wanted by Hitler himself. But at that time, with the war in Europe, Porsche, like other designers, was focused on building armored vehicles. Things hadn't gone very well for him up to that point, and they wouldn't get much better, because in the end, the German army would only take one vehicle he built, a cannon that was renamed in his honor, Ferdinand. But all the other projects would not be selected. In fact, they would be discarded. This is also the case with the Tiger tank, which was awarded to Henschel and Sohn, who won the contract, while Porsche's proposal for the Panzer Tiger P was rejected. That new tank, which entered service in November 1942, became a benchmark for all armies. Why is that? Let's start with a fact. It's an extremely heavy tank, weighing as much as 57 tons. It's not very fast, with a declared maximum road speed of 32 km/h. They wanted 40, but they couldn't do any better. It has a range of just under 200 kilometers on the road, depending, of course, on the conditions. It can overcome a maximum slope of 70%, and most importantly, it is extremely well protected and has a strong presence. The main armament, in fact, is the 88 anti-tank gun with a 56 caliber barrel. It is the adaptation of an anti-aircraft artillery piece to the anti-tank role, already successfully tested by Erwin Rommel in North Africa. Rommel was among the first to discover the potential of the anti-aircraft gun, which, having a high muzzle velocity, could penetrate tank armor from a long distance. Rommel's tank tactics in North Africa had proven to be successful, and precisely because of the performance of that cannon, it was decided to develop an anti-tank gun from it, which was later installed in the Panzer PI, a panzer that would become a symbol not so much of the Panzer divisions, which continued to use the Panzer IV or the Panther, but rather of the independent armored battalions, which were equipped with this new tank and which became an absolute symbol of German power on the battlefields.
Tedesca sui campi di battaglia.
Just think about this. The shaped charge shell of the Panzer was capable of penetrating the armor of any tank, British or English. Think about medium tanks, obviously at more than 2,500 meters away, 2.5 kilometers. As for heavy tanks, think about the Joseph Stalin II or the M26 Pershing. In that case, the engagement distance was reduced to about 1 kilometer, but it was enough to make the Tiger the toughest opponent to face on the battlefield. The Americans realized this in 1943 in North Africa. Rommel had been on the defensive for some time and was called back to the area to try to save what could be saved. His Panzer Army Africa was reduced to a minimum, but it had received the new Tiger. The Tiger was tested successfully at the Battle of Kasserine Pass, considered Rommel's swan song, where he contained the Allied offensive. He also managed to repel the Americans, inflicting losses on them. That's where the famous legend was born. If you want to take on a Tiger, you need to use at least 4 Shermans, expecting to lose 3. Because what happens is that to take on a Tiger, you have to attack from both sides, sacrificing some tanks and their crews to the 88 mm cannon until you manage to hit the Tiger. Where it's weakest, at the tracks or at the engine in the back, which is less armored, less protected. But the Tiger has some problems, and the problems mainly concern the size of the tracks, which have to be replaced every time the tank is transported by rail or on the road. The width has to be reduced, otherwise the tank becomes impossible to transport. Then there's the engine. The chosen engine is the Maybach 12-cylinder engine with a 60-degree V. It's a powerful engine, but it's delicate. It requires maintenance and a lot of fuel. Just think, the Tiger's fuel tank holds 540 liters. But, in fact, with this amount of gasoline, you can't go more than 200 kilometers on the road. And on rough terrain, off-road, you have to reduce that range by at least 35%. This means that the Tiger is an excellent machine, reliable up to a certain point, lethal in combat conditions, but it has mechanical issues, and above all, an excessive fuel consumption. From the Tiger, however, the Germans developed another vehicle, a vehicle that isn't exactly a tank. It's called the Tiger Mörser, or Sturmtiger, Assault Tiger. It's a self-propelled gun, but it's not like the others. It's basically a huge demolition vehicle based on the Tiger's chassis. A large enclosed superstructure is placed on it, inside which a naval mortar is installed, the Sturm Mörser, a 380mm weapon that fires rocket-propelled shells, each weighing as much as 345 kilo. What is something like this used for? Actually, the Germans came up with this demolition vehicle after the Battle of Stalingrad, a battle we've already covered on the channel, where the Germans were forced to fight. going block by block, street by street, house by house in a destructive and exhausting way. For this reason, the Germans thought of creating a demolition tank capable of destroying an entire building with a single shot, enough to spare themselves the trouble of urban guerrilla fighting. This is how the Sturmtiger was born, but by the time it entered service with not even 20 units produced, it had already in practice exhausted its purpose. The only time it was really used for what could have been its purpose was during the Warsaw Uprising. We talked about it. You can find the video on the channel. The Sturmtiger, with a single shot, can crumble an entire building, and that's what it does to suppress the uprising, to destroy the buildings that had been turned into fortresses by the Polish National Army that had revolted in the summer of '44. But the Sturmtiger was also used during the Battle of the Ruhr Pocket in the early months of '45 against Sherman tanks. Even though it's not a real tank, it still gets results. Just think that a single Sturmtiger with a single shot manages to destroy 4 Sherman tanks on its own. This is to show just how destructive that weapon, that Sturmmörser, that naval mortar with rocket-propelled shells, really is. But otherwise, it's useless in open combat. By mid-1944, the Sturmtiger Armaments Inspectorate sends another heavy tank to the front line. It's commonly called Königstiger, Royal Tiger, Bengal Tiger. It's called that to distinguish it from its predecessor, which is being phased out. Actually, the Königstiger also has a somewhat longer development history, because as early as January '43, it was requested as a new tank. And to think that in January '43, it's only been 3 months since its predecessor, the Tiger, entered service. Why is that? After just 3 months, the German army is already requesting a new heavy tank, simply because during World War II, improvements in the war industry were constant, coming at a frantic pace. A few months after the introduction of the first Tiger, it became clear that the Soviet armored forces, not the Allied ones, were fielding increasingly heavier tanks, capable of outperforming even the Tigers themselves. And on the other hand, because the Germans had to take advantage of a new type of 88mm gun, the one with the longer barrel, at 71.2 calibers, an extremely powerful cannon, which outclasses any other weapon present, except for one, just one, the British 17-pounder cannon, which would become the mortal enemy of any German tank. But let's stay with the Sturmtiger, which was also studied, as always, by Henschel Sohn and Porsche. And once again, Heinkel wins, managing to Henschel
che riesce a ottenere
the contract for the supply of this tank, which entered service in September 1944. A practically indestructible tank. It's even heavier than the original Tiger, weighing almost 70 tons. It's a tank that set the standard because it incorporated the improvements introduced both by the Panther tank, which in turn had adopted the sloped armor from the Russian T-34, as well as the improvements introduced with the first Tiger tank, the Tiger I. So, by doubling the armored surface, improving the armor that reaches almost 150 millimeters on the front section, and fitting a bigger, larger turret capable of housing that cannon, that extremely powerful cannon. But the Königstiger, despite having several improvements, also has a fatal flaw. It keeps the same engine, the Maybach, which, yes, has its power increased up to 700 horsepower, but it's fragile. It has transmission problems, it has gearbox issues. On rough terrain, it doesn't go over 15 km/h, and above all, it consumes a lot. The fuel tank, which goes from 560 liters to 860 liters of gasoline, actually gives it even less range than its predecessor, the Tiger I. If before it could almost reach 200 kilometers on the road, now it doesn't even get to 170 km even, though it has a bigger and larger tank. This means that the Sturmtiger, which is basically an almost indestructible machine, is slow and has fragile internal mechanics. And obviously, like all the other tanks, it is subject to the aerial threat from the Allied and Soviet forces, who, starting from the end of 1944, began to dominate the skies. Basically, the Sturmtiger had already been an overblown showpiece. The Königsteiger becomes a magnificent tank, an exemplary powerful feat of German engineering, but not very useful, even though it manages to keep the enemy in check from distances of over 2,000 meters. Most opponents, except for a very few tanks like the Pershing or the Josef Stalin II, the fact that it was thirsty for gasoline, for fuel, and the fact that repairs required at least a day with 6 skilled mechanics to replace a wheel on the running gear, or even 2 days to replace the engine, already doomed the Königsteiger to failure from the start. And yet the Germans decided to use the Königsteiger chassis for another Tiger, the Jagdtiger, the Hunter Tiger, which despite its name is not a tank but a tank destroyer. Using, as mentioned, the hull of the Königsteiger, the Germans built a large armored casemate, inside which was placed the formidable Pak 44 cannon, a 128mm anti-tank gun, an exceptional weapon capable of piercing the armor of enemy vehicles from any distance. This one is also indestructible, also extremely powerful, but also fragile, because the engine is still the same. But that's not all. The fuel tank is even smaller, and besides being small, it's a tank that doesn't allow for much range, because the vehicle, which already weighed 69 tons, now weighs 76 tons, and it takes 5 liters of gasoline to travel a single kilometer. If you complain today about your cars and always calculate which ones consume less, just imagine a vehicle that, even when filled with gasoline, only goes a few kilometers and no more. Both the Americans and the Soviets notice this, as they often find Jagdtigers abandoned on the roads, in the cities, and in the countryside, because the crews, unable to push the vehicle anymore since it had run out of fuel, preferred to run away and walk home. The Jagdtiger becomes the ultimate symbol of the German ability to build theoretically exceptional, extremely powerful combat machines, designed to destroy all opponents, but always with those little flaws: the fragility of the engine, the gearbox, the transmission, the vulnerabilities, fuel consumption, among other things, for a nation now reduced to its last legs, which ultimately leads to its failure. And so today, when we see what remains of the German productions from the 1940s in various armored vehicle museums, the Tiger, the Königsteiger, the Sturmtiger, or the Jagdtiger, they are like tigers in a cage, beautiful, majestic, proud, dangerous. But these tigers are lame, slow, toothless. They look beautiful and proud, but they are harmless. They are today, and they prove to be so in the past as well, because they were produced by a proud, strong, determined nation, but one destined for defeat. A nation that was always demanding new weapons, but was incapable of facing reality. The reality was that it was impossible to constantly supply mechanized vehicles with fuel. A reality made up of the difficulty of replacing the various vehicles lost in battle on too many battlefields. A reality also made up of an army, the German one, that no matter how combative, well-trained, or well-led, was historically destined for defeat. And today those vehicles, those tigers in a cage, remind us of it in their majesty and in their testimony of a past made of daring techniques, but also of serious mistakes, even in design. Welcome back to Dentro la Storia, the channel for those who love contemporary history. Have you already signed up for the free monthly newsletter from Dentro la Storia? No? Look, the latest issue came out just a few days ago, and you might still have time to catch up on it. If you don't know how to do it, go to the official Dentro la Storia website. There's an area dedicated to our newsletter, and there you can request it immediately, completely free of charge. It doesn't cost a thing. And this newsletter will arrive at the beginning of every month in your email inbox with lots of exclusive content created just for you. On our website, you'll find the newsletter, our videos, our podcasts, our articles, our editorial insights, and also our exclusive online store, where you can find our clothing and many other items picked out for you.